Juanita, I'm so excited to have you on here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries. Look, let's dive straight in. Tell me, who are you? Where are you from and where are you based now?
Yes, I am Juanita Ingram. I'm originally from America, from Tennessee, and I am based right now in Singapore. And I've lived in London for 5 years before that, in Taiwan, and now we're in Singapore.
So you've had quite the interesting journey over how many years to date?
12 years.
Oh, so what year was it? Excusing my maths here. What year was it when you kicked off trailing spouse global domination of
Life,
expat world life?
2011. And that just literally just hit me this year that because I was telling someone, I was like, well, I think I've been at this for like 10 years. And then I started adding, I was like, no, wait, it's been longer than that. So yeah, it's been 12 years.
Goodness. So what took you away in the first place?
I've been a trailing spouse the entire time. My husband's job and his promotion is what started it all. Although he laughs and he's just like, I don't know, Juanita, maybe it was your purpose in life. And I was just here being used to get you clearly where you needed to go. And I'm just a catalyst. And God is like doing the purse strings for your benefit only, and it's all about you. So I don't know, but I am technically a trailing spouse.
Good. Well, as long as that he knows the role that he is meant to be playing in this situation, I'm very pleased.
And as long as he accepts it, I tell people all the time, I'm like, trailing spouse, sugar daddy. I don't care. It's fine. That's what he is. He's my
Whatever,
number one sponsor.
whatever job title you want to take, mate, it's all yours.
Right. Yeah. I mean, people get into the nuance of trailing spouse versus accompanying spouse. I'm like, I like referring to him as my sugar daddy. I mean, we've been married 18 years. That's your role, sir. You're my sponsor.
Perfect. Now tell me, you've had such an interesting trailing spouse journey. I would love to sort of hear how things evolved, like when you first got to London, then step into Taiwan, and then now Singapore. Tell us about like what you actually have been getting up to for the last 12 years.
Sure. Well, I am a lawyer by trade, and we don't tote well. Every lawyer that I talk to, I'm like, do you tote well, or is it just me? And everyone's like, no, you don't, because you're licensed in the country that you're licensed in the state that you're licensed in. And I've been practicing for about 8 years. When we first made the first leap, I've been a lawyer for 20 years. And, the first journey, you're so infatuated with the idea of living abroad that sometimes as career women, or at least with me, I didn't really take a full stock of what it was going to mean when I quit. And when I decided to become a full-time trailing spouse, and at the time my kids were really young. My son, I was still nursing myself, I was still breastfeeding. My son was 13 months old. He's now 13 years old. But well, he'd be 13 years old, like in a month. But he was 13 months old. My daughter was 3. I had never been a stay-at-home mom before. And I still remember the sound of the gravel underneath the car as my husband rolled out of the driveway, like slow roll. And I stood there and I was like, oh, snap, wait a minute. What does this mean? And I was holding one child. I was like, whoa, wait. What does this mean? First 4 months, I did not know that I had trailing spouse syndrome. I did not know what that was. I hadn't looked it up. I hadn't really looked into anything. I didn't really take stock of what it meant because the move is so big and you have to do so much. There's so much paperwork. There's so much to do, and you've got kids in your house and all this stuff that you get wrapped up in the move. And then the dust settles and you realize that you are there. And there's something about isolation that you have to make a very intentional choice towards isolation and what you're going to do with that. When we first moved to London, I spent the first 4 months dealing with trailing spouse syndrome, feeling very alone. I cried every day. My legal colleagues were like, are you sure? What have you done? And it was a constant nagging question. So what are you going to do? Like, we understand your husband's job brought you there. That's great. It sounds really cute for you and your family. but no, seriously, Juanita, what are you going to do? And it was that question that really threw me for a spin because I didn't know. I hadn't really thought about what success looks like for me. I thought about it for us as a family and for him. I did not think about what I was going to do with myself, with my time. Of course, I had these lofty ideas that I was going to go to the day spa every day. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking. Like I was just going to be like this idea of this kept woman, which for some women that is enough and that is great. But for me, it was not enough. I did not work that hard to become a lawyer for 8 years and then not like it wasn't like my career was going bad. I was like top lawyer award, top 40 under 40, up and coming lawyer leadership. Like I was that girl in the legal field. And I no one takes the bar exam and passes. I took it twice in 2 different states. No one works that hard because I wasn't doing well. So I sat there and I had to, the best thing that I did, I invested in a life coach because I spent so much time, and I tell people all the time, I wasted like the first 4 months in London. I could have done so much more had I not sat there and thought about everything that I was giving up instead of focusing on what was in front of me and the opportunity that was in front of me. But because sometimes our profession becomes our personality, becomes our identity, becomes attached to our worth and who we are. I was Juanita the lawyer, and that was it. So fast forward, I get the life coach. She helps me to understand and give myself permission. I had, some people are born with like 1 or 2 lanes. Some people are born with 5 lanes. I have 5. And I never given myself permission to drive in all 5. I'd only driven in like 2 at the most, and I never really given myself, because the law is a very conservative function. But that's when I gave myself permission. I went back to acting. I had to ask myself, well, Juanita, what is it that you really love to do? And a lot of people had never even met that side of me. I've been acting since I was 9. I started out in theater. I played 5 instruments. I've been a performer my whole life, but nobody really saw that side because I had been adulting. And so no one knew that, except for people I like went to school with. So then you fast forward and I started back acting and I started producing and created my own production company, got a couple of awards, decided to go into film and television. And yeah, that it's been interesting. I've started writing books. I did a little bit of pageantry here and there, and really opened up myself to this idea of the fullness of who I was, and investing in the life coach to say, okay, Juanita, who all are you? And what all can you do? And what would you do if you could do anything and wake up in the morning and do anything? What would you do? And it was giving myself permission to mourn the trajectory of what my career was going to be, because I had these lofty plans, even though I willingly signed up for this. But I tell people all the time, as a trailing spouse, especially if you are a trailing spouse that had a career that you have to leave, pivot, shift, make an adjustment to, quit for a period of time, and you actually had plans for that career, you are agreeing to starve. And you are agreeing to starve that part of you, and you agreed to it. It's not your spouse's fault. It's not anybody's. It's not a bad thing, but you are starving that side of you. And with starvation comes hunger pains. And there are days when that diet that you signed up for is going to be fine, and you're going to be snatched from it, and you're going to find other ways, and you'll feed yourself in other ways, and it's going to be fine. And then there are days that you'll be like the Snickers commercial and you won't be yourself because you're hungry. And that side of yourself is hungry. But you must remember that you agreed to be hungry. And you have to navigate that hunger as best as you can, and finding new ways to feed the fullness until you are full again. And you will become full again. So for me, because I am a multi-hyphenate, I had to give myself permission to be that too. I decided to start producing and creating, and to create the first docuseries that ever chronicled that experience, because I had entertainment clients as a lawyer in the reality space, and knew that there was a niche for a particular type of content within that genre that was very family friendly, but as a filmmaker, you always want to tell a story that hasn't been told, and no one's ever shown that. The relocation world went crazy over it because it was the first time that anyone had ever really showed what that process is like.
Can
So
you
that's what I've been up to, and that's the journey.
Oh, this is why
US.
it's so funny, and this is why like I'm such a fangirl. I love it. There's a couple of things that I just wanted to. I love that analogy of the lanes, and you only have sort of been steering and hanging out in two of your 5 lanes, and that you've really been able to like lean into taking advantage of that. And I also love that analogy around the hunger thing, because that's a really interesting sort of like visual for it. And I think it's a really like great reminder that this is something that you signed up for and that the decision has been made, but don't then just sit in the corner starving, like actually go and feed yourself.
Feed yourself with something else, because that hunger pain is always going to be there. And even when you're feeding yourself, but if you decide, if you really loved apples and you decide, I'm never eating an apple again, even though you have a plate full of other food, you're going to miss the apple. It's okay. It's okay to mourn the trajectory of what you thought things were going to be. And that doesn't mean that you don't appreciate what's happening now. Doesn't mean that you can't celebrate where you are. Hopefully it means that you don't stay in that moment. Allow yourself to push through that, sit in those feelings, understand that it comes and goes. It's a cycle of grief. You may have to grieve the career that you were going to have and that you don't have right now. But once you push past that grief, there's so much opportunity that exists when you are allowed to mourn that and move past it. The reason why I say starvation is because sometimes our accompanying spouse needs to understand exactly what's happening. Because I had a friend one time who was a producer out of the UK, and she said that she had a 4-year-old daughter. She became a trailing spouse, left the producing world in television, and she was just talking about how much she missed it. And that her husband came home and was like, well, what are you complaining about? Your life is great. I mean, all you have to do is take care of our daughter. You get to spend more time with our daughter than I do. I don't get to spend as much time with her. So what are you complaining about? And I said, well, you need to remind him, it doesn't matter that he doesn't get as much time, but you do get time. You're not starving. You might be on a relegated diet, but when you walk through the door, it's daddy. You didn't starve daddy today. But TV producers starved indefinitely, almost until maybe you kill her off and she might die. She might, that part of you, you may pivot, and that may never be a part of your journey again, or it may in different ways. But your accompanying spouse doesn't have to starve that aspect of fatherhood or motherhood or parenthood. They don't. And so even though you may be overeating in certain areas and eating more in parenthood and these type of experiences, that part of you that you agreed to starve is very unique to the trailing spouse. But it is what we agreed to do. And if you start feeding it with other things, you may find out that you like a variety of different meals, and that life is presenting some amazing opportunities for you to dive into that you otherwise wouldn't have. And it can be very, extremely fulfilling.
Well, I'm feeling awkwardly hungry having this conversation.
Go get an apple. Pick a healthy choice.
Now, I want you to tell us about this docu-series. Like, I love it so much. Can you give us what the pitch was, the pitch for the project in the first place?
Yes, we used to have these things called Soul Food Sundays when we used to live in London, and we would rotate houses, and it was all the Black people, Black Americans that lived in the area, and we would rotate houses and just have a barbecue and, just have family time. And one day we were celebrating a family that was going back to the US, and we were like 35 of us, and Frankie Beverly and Maze and Beyonce was playing, and we were barbecuing, the kids were running around, and you could have been anywhere in America in this scene. It was just really regular Black America cultural scene. And I looked up, and there was Windsor Castle, because that's where we were living at the time. And I just thought to myself, like, oh my God, this is a show. Because you don't see it. And you don't see the journey of expats. You don't see our lives. You don't know. People think that we're on a perpetual vacation. You have absolutely no idea what it's like to pick up your life and relocate. But the pitch really is navigating change, because you can be a trailing spouse and you don't have to move internationally. The first time I was a trailing spouse was when I moved from Tennessee to Indiana. And I quit my job in Tennessee and moved to Indiana and had to find a totally different network. Domestically, you could still be a trailing spouse, but it's about trailing spouse issues is in there, especially in season one. It's about navigating change, about finding tribe. It's all about life happening. It's very family friendly. There's no fighting. There's no cursing. We were the best web series at the Christian Film Festival. So yeah, I was getting ready to say something. You can edit this out. They missed all the LGBTQ stuff in there. I don't know how we won. I really don't. I was like, praise the Lord. But there were some things in there that I was like, we're very inclusive, very diverse, because that's my life. Those are my friends. And not intentionally that way. It's just how life reflects itself. But it is the first unscripted show. I call it a docu-series because I feel like it's it's a genre within the genre of unscripted television. And it shows us moving from Indiana to Taiwan in season one, getting the kids in school, maybe not getting them in school. Then we had the onset of COVID and that whole experience. So, I prayed for high stakes, because people always say, well, it's not a travel show, it's a lifestyle show. Well, what are the stakes? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to take life as it comes. It's pretty dramatic. When you live abroad, things are pretty dramatic and life presents its own dramas. And it didn't let us down. And so season 2 just released this month. And we're on Amazon Prime. And that takes us from Taiwan to Singapore. And we really focus this season. We have 12 new expats on the show. They don't all know each other, but it's about their journeys. I know them all. So we have everything from student exchange expats to military families this season, which was interesting. I had to get approval from the Pentagon, and I got it to film with them and to show their journey. It is a unique lens in that it is told from a Black lens abroad, because intersectionality, that experience will be a bit different, but it's still, there's a variety of a diverse cast. So it's everybody's journey, from people who are Taiwanese, local Singaporeans. My very good friend, Zach, teases me all the time. He's not the only white person on the show, but he does tease me that he was the diversity hire. He was not. He's just my friend. My life is very diverse. He was not the diversity hire, but we do show a diverse amount of people who are living abroad, primarily through a Black lens, which is also unique, presents its own, again, intersectionality issues that rise up. A story that's never been told, a lens that's never been looked through before. And so my family is on there, my kids, other children as well. And so it's really fun. It's funny, and it's a good time. I like to make people laugh. So I'm not brave enough to do stand-up comedy, but this is my outlet. So it's a good time, and it's based on edutainment, which is a phrase that the Black Panthers coined a long time ago, where it's both educational and entertaining. So that's the goal.
Oh my gosh, I love it. That's so good. So tell me, as far as like your new, well, not newfound, but your sort of exploring like that creative and acting side of your career, which, to be honest, I'm positive that you were probably using it in a courtroom quite regularly as far as your law career.
All the time. In fact, my acting classes, I'm a master's level Chubbuck level actress, and I've studied for years, honestly improved my skills as a lawyer, just to be able to control emotion and to be able to convey and just to be aware of what you were projecting and giving. It does. But then again, I think you can do anything with a legal degree. I think all things play into, and I had to do research for other people within my industry that did other things. Because so oftentimes people will put you in a box, and we have that sort of negative narrative coming at us as trailing spouses when we have to pivot from a particular trajectory in our careers to something else, which should be a really good time and a really good experience. But because of the way that our society sometimes is set up, that we have these conversations that come to us and narratives that something is wrong if you're doing things in a different way, or why are you quitting that job, or why are you sure about this? And people will project their fears onto you because you're navigating the unknown and navigating change, and maybe doing it in a way that other people are not comfortable with. And I think that's why it's so important when you do that you find tribe. That's one of the themes in the show, is finding tribe. And you have to do that.
There must be some go-to tips that you use then. What is your sort of your tribe finding strategies, or your go-tos? So when you've like come out of your shell shock 4 months in London, when did you start like getting back out there, and how did you find your tribe in London?
And I think it's twofold, especially now. This is 12 years ago, but now, if I could give tips for today, there are so many affinity groups out there that exist that were not in existence 12 years ago. There's a Facebook group for every country that you move into. And there's a group for you, like Australians in Singapore. There will be, and honestly, especially for diversity, there's a Black affinity group for every country that you move there. There are Black in Singapore, Black in Taiwan, Black in Thailand. So whatever type of tribe, there are moms in Singapore, mom expats in Singapore. There's an expat group for you to find. I highly recommend that you do that, just so that it gives you the opportunity to network. You're not going to like everybody that you meet. It's the same as in life. You'll meet some expats that'll be your greatest friends. You'll meet some that you want to run from. It's fine. There are people in life that you want to run from. It's fine. But these affinity groups are so helpful in finding a network. I think the pre-work to moving that I give everyone advice on is close your eyes. What does a successful day, week, or month look like wherever you're going? And if you don't know what that looks like, you haven't done enough research on what it is that you're going to do. And it doesn't have to stay that way. It could be that, do you like to knit? Are you going to find the Knitting in Singapore group? Do you like to take, ballroom dancing class? How are you going to feed something about yourself, your soul, even if it's just, what spa am I going to visit first? But you have to step out of your comfort zone. You can't just stay in your apartment or your condo or your home. You have to get out. There are American clubs, Australian clubs, French. There's every group that you can think of. And I suggest, even though you might be, I'm actually technically, no one knows that I'm an introvert. The way you are and the way I recharge, I'm very much leave me alone. But I have extrovert habits and activities, but introvert truly. So sometimes for me in the beginning, I had to work on my ability to go out and network. By nature, I'd never really done that. I had a very small group of friends that I've had since I was 2 years old. And I felt like we were good. And I didn't want to go out and make new friends. But you do have to exercise that. And then for me, it was volunteering. So I started Dress for Success in London because I was a volunteer in the US. Sometimes if you can find a global organization that you've been volunteering with, and they exist globally, for me, it was a reason for me to get out of the house, and it was something familiar. It made me feel like, oh, this is something that I'm familiar with. This is like home. This is an anchor. So I would get up and I would volunteer twice a month, every 2 weeks at Dress for Success in London. Then that affiliate closed. I met the worldwide CEO. She called me up, will you start this again? But truly finding the commonality in what was familiar and volunteering my hours, it was a reason for me to get up and to have a reason to get dressed and socialize, and then create a new pocket of people that I knew. I started meeting local Londoners, and we're still close to this day. And so you branch out beyond your American club, and you start to live a little bit and find out about things about the area that you would otherwise not even know. So those 2 to 3 things, I think, is what I would advise people to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. So how did you find then a transition from London to Taiwan as you know, as a sort of a Westerner going from still a big culture shock, but then going from from London into Asia as an American? How did you sort of find that transition, and like what did the first sort of 6 months look like for you when you got there?
Well, obviously, this time I went with very deep purpose because I'd already started my production company, and I knew that when we moved to Taiwan, it would be time to launch the show. So for me, within the first 6 months, I had camera crews and, was auditioning people for the show and casting and really having a purpose. Well, I actually started filming before, just the transition. And it was very purposeful. Now, aside from the show, culturally, it's a difference. When we moved to London, it is a very big culture shock because even British English and American English is very different, but it was still English. And so I think the adding in a true language barrier is a very different international experience. And that was probably the hardest part, quite frankly, because Taiwan is very safe. It's beautiful. It's really nice. The food is great. It's not as easy to navigate because if Mandarin is not your first language in a place like Taiwan, you will struggle. In fact, when I tell people I've lived in Taiwan, they're like, "Oh, so you speak Mandarin?" And I'm like, "No," and that was part of the problem. And I tried to pick it up, not my jam. I tried, and it's a very hard language. My son is fluent. He picked it up, but he's a child. I took 6 years of Spanish, and every word I learned in Mandarin, I thought of it in Spanish first. So I only have so much space. It's occupied. I can't do it. Very hard cultural, very hard. And hard to go from a very diverse environment to one that was far more homogeneous in their ethnicities that were present and what they had been accustomed to being exposed to. So that was a bit of a culture shock as well in terms of trying to navigate through that experience, both for myself, for my children. It's just when you are othered, that is very different. And I hadn't been accustomed to being that other because London is full of everybody. It's almost like Singapore. Everybody, in fact, when I moved from Taiwan to Singapore, I tell my friends in Taiwan, they were like, "What was it like?" And I'm like, I breathed like, because no one cared that I was there. Nobody cared. No one was staring at me. Nobody, my color was not an issue. Nobody found it unique. Nobody cares. It's the same way in London. Nobody cares. There's so much other that is not that big of a deal. But in Taiwan, the other became very pronounced and very profound. So it was difficult in that regard, and the language barrier was very difficult. But it's a beautiful place. And again, the food is great. I don't know what I ate. Half the stuff I have no idea, but it was good. I'm also vegan. I couldn't read any of the ingredients. I think I'm vegan. I don't know. While I was there, I hope so. Yeah, I asked for that, but who knows? So it's one of those things where you truly have to hone in on your ability to be flexible, to focus on the positive, and to not get too bogged down in the weeds and just kind of go with the flow.
Yeah. You may have just had a vegan hiatus for some time while you were there.
Who knows? Who knows? Who's to say? I don't know. I mean, Google Translate only works so much, and when it fails big time.
Hilarious.
And it failed many times. I was looking at the back of boxes, and I'm like, there is not a shoestring in this pasta sauce. What is it talking about? I don't know. But I have to believe that the pasta sauce is vegan. I have to believe that it's just, what else could you put in here? So there were certain things that I just, threw up my hands and went with the flow and claimed veganism anyway. I was vegan in spirit. Can't prove it all the time, but Singapore is a much easier experience where language is not a barrier. London was easier in that regard because language was not a barrier, but Mandarin is a beautiful language. It's just very difficult. And even though I play 5 instruments, it's the tones. It is intimidating for me, but I'm still trying. I know enough to be quiet.
Interesting. So how long did you have in Taiwan? How long were you there?
Only 2 years. Only 2 years. Long enough to know that you need more than 2 years to learn Mandarin. You just do. My son has had 4 years now of Mandarin, so he's quite, but he's a child, and so it's quite easy for them. But yeah, it's something you just have to stick with.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, how fascinating. That's great. I guess you've touched on some really interesting pieces of advice like throughout the conversation here. I guess, can you tell me an experience that you've had over this last 12 years that you're like, this is just one of those things that could never have happened to me if I'd sort of continued on life path that was the trajectory that was happening in the US. Has there been anything that has just been such a fabulous experience that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I would have ever been Ms. World International in 2011, and I would not be the current Mrs. Universe had I not been living abroad.
Okay, we have to talk about this.
Right. My whole pageantry experience, and just even competing internationally came about. In fact, that was the thing that got me up off the couch in London. And I was invited to compete at Mrs. World, as I had just competed. I was the first Black woman to win Mrs. Indiana USA. And this was in 2007. And I started in Mrs. pageants. A lot of people don't know, like there's a teen and there's a Miss, MISS, and then there's Mrs. And in fact, I was talking to someone from Gen Z, and they were like, yeah, I don't think our entire generation knows the difference between Miss and Mrs. And I'm like, that's weird. But I won't let that person speak for an entire generation. But Mrs. pageants there's a Mrs. for every title. And so I started out in the US. I competed for Mrs. Indiana America, and I lost. And at the time, I was like, oh my gosh, that's, you win some, you lose some. And then we found out a week later that we were moving to London. I'm like, aha, that's why I lost. It wasn't meant to be. And then I moved to London, and the Mrs. Pageantry circuit is very small. So the owners and directors of Mrs. UK World at the time, I think they had been on hiatus. They were looking for someone, they were casting for someone to represent them at Mrs. World. It was very last minute. And they were like, hey, we heard you were in our country, saw you compete. You're amazing. Would you mind representing the UK at Mrs. World? And I'm like, are you serious? And they're like, yes, we would like to cast and, see your walk and everything, but yes, we would like you to do that. So that got me up off the couch, because there's a swimsuit competition and there's, you got to walk towards the judges and away. And so I was like, well, maybe I should get off this couch and stop eating chips and crying every day and go do something, again, that which is familiar, tapping into that which makes you feel grounded, something that allows you to do something familiar. But had I not started the journey of international competitions, and also in the Mrs. sector, it's not necessarily based on nationality in terms of where you get to represent, it's based on residency. So that opened a door of opportunity of international competition that may not have been open. Now, could I have always been Mrs. Universe? Maybe, I don't know. But it definitely opened the opportunity for me to compete on an international level, raise funds and awareness for Dress for Success on an international level. I'm now the ambassador for Singapore and Dress for Success, as well as London, as well as opening an affiliate in my hometown of Chattanooga, Tennessee. So in the Mrs. sector, Miss is all about the prize package and what you get. In the Mrs. sector, you're in a different stage of life. It's really about raising awareness and funds for your charity of choice and about giving. So it opened up the opportunity for me to give and empower other women in a way that may not have been available to me had it not been for me living abroad. So that's a benefit. If you get up and stop crying and put the chips down, and pick the crown up, you'll be fine.
You literally picked the crown up. I'm very impressed.
Literally. I had to compete. Now they invited me to represent the country. I had to compete and win the national titles, though. I had to compete for that, which is like 79 other contestants. It was interesting. A lot of growth periods. It was very interesting journey. It's a totally different podcast. Very interesting journey.
Yes, I think that is a different podcast. Had you pageant as a child? Like had this been no? How interesting. And I just have like I'm actually intrigued by this whole concept. Like, how did the British women feel with like the crown being taken by an American woman, or did you actually find, because it's more residency and location based, that it was a lot more of a melting pot in that crowd?
It was more of a melting pot, but I think I'm the only American that's ever done it. I don't think they've ever crowned another American since me or before me or after me. I don't know if I ruined it for the rest of us. I don't know. But I think, it's, again, London is a very diverse place. And so it's very open and welcoming in that regard. Although it's the same as in Singapore. I think 90% of Singaporeans, I did not represent the United States when I won Mrs. Universe. I was Mrs. Singapore. So I won for Singapore. I think some people just like to win, and they don't really care who wins for them as long as their country wins. So they don't really care. So it's fine. And then there are some who are always, for whatever reason, take issue. And it's interesting because in season 2, we talk about this issue. Because originally they wanted to cast me to represent Taiwan. And Taiwan represents not just a place or a nationality, but a race. And what are the difference and nuances in that? But pageantry for me is a sport. Not for me, pageantry is a sport, period. It's a competition. It's a sport like any other sport. My issue, and again, intersectionality coming into play, I did get some issues and some experiences as a Black woman in pageantry that others would not receive. And it is a real issue because, and I won't give away too much of the show, but there was a dialogue that I had with someone that took issue with me being in that position. But you don't take issue with any of your Black Taiwanese NBA players. You don't. It is not an issue. You can say, well, you're an expat, you won't be here for long, or you haven't been here that long. Well, neither have any of the Black guys that you recruit to dribble the ball. But when beauty is infused into it, then it becomes an issue, but it's a sport like any other sport. So what is the problem? What are the real issues? Those are the very deep dialogues and conversations that we have on the show, because art is always a way and a catalyst, and has always been so, of having the conversations that society is not ready to have. So you do it in a safe haven of, well, this is a show. So surely we must be able to have these conversations here, because, oh my gosh, it would be too awkward and too intense to have them in real life. And art has always been the catalyst to bring about change and to be the birthing place of these conversations that need to be had. So I won't tell you the outcome of that, but we did discuss it, and I have experienced it. But for the most part, again, everybody likes a winner, so they don't really care. But there are overflows of society that come into play in every arena, and pageantry is no different.
Yeah, well, no spoilers. People are going to have to watch to find out this.
Well, they'll have to watch to see what went on behind the scenes. I think if they Google me, they'll know that I won. But what was the journey in getting there? What did it look like? And it is not what you think. I was so fortunate that they let me film. I have great directors. They are so amazing. The system is wonderful, and it's great. But the journey is very different. It's not at all what you think about when you think about pageantry, which is nice. So it's a world within a world. You'll get to see two worlds that are often unseen this season. Good. So yeah. So
good. Have you got one thing you wish you'd known before you started?
I wish I'd known to let go. Yeah. I wish I'd known to let go without trying to tether to, without trying to look back. to really let go, to honor the past, mourn it if you need to, grieve it if you need to. But what's in front of you is so much, it's not even better, it's just different. It's just the season that you're supposed to be in, and then knowing that you're not missing out on anything. You are where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and that God doesn't work that way, or the universe, whatever you want to call it. You're not going to miss out on anything. That's not true. So whatever you think you're missing, you're not. You are exactly where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and you lack nothing, and it's going to be okay.
That is the best way to possibly round this out. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute hoot. Thank you so much, Juanita.
Thank you.